Hospitality. Here in the United States, we have an entire industry that generates billions of dollars and supports millions of jobs, all centered around this idea of providing certain services for strangers. But the idea of providing food, lodging accommodations, entertainment, and care for people we don't even know actually goes back thousands of years. The, the Greek word for this service is philoxenia. Say it with me now. Lo, zen, and yeah. Well done. And it means love of strangers. Sometimes when we think about working in the hospitality industry, we think it's sticking a plastic smile on our face and putting up with difficult people because the customer is always right. But the love of strangers means a lot more than that, both in ancient times and today. I am Seth Hord, but you can call me Seth, like all my friends do. I'm really glad you're joining us today. I even saved you a seat because I want to share with you a glimpse into what I studied about loving strangers, or philoxenia, and what it has to do with Christianity today. One of the earliest known leaders of the first century Christians was named Clement, and he wrote a letter to the Corinthians now known as First Clement. The first time I read his letter, I was surprised that he listed hospitality among other virtues like steadfast faith, piety, sound knowledge, proper thoughts, reverence, pure conscience, humility, submissiveness, being glad to give, and free from malice. Hospitality is not usually mentioned in sacrament meeting talks I hear about Christ-like attributes. So this line of thinking led me to ask whether considering hospitality a Christian virtue was a cultural phenomenon among the first century Christians, or what Clement's use of hospitality could tell us about our first century Christian brothers and sisters. I found that Clement's writings about hospitality conform to the prevailing culture in principle at times, but not in style. So I started with Greco-Roman hospitality, since that was the culture surrounding Christianity when First Clement was reportedly written. Scholars have identified several consistent elements of hospitality scenes in Greek and Roman literature, but even though there's a stylistic consistency and they can look at various hospitality scenes and recognize patterns, it's really clear that there was no single formula for good hospitality. It was just something they did as part of who they were, and it revealed something about the host and the guest. So generally, hospitality scenes in Greek and Roman literature look something like this. There's a stranger, on a wanderer or on a journey, who approaches, and the host looks up, acknowledges them, sees them, and then offers hospitality, usually as in the form of a place to sit, food, a bath, clothes, entertainment, that sort of thing. Following the meal or the care of the guest, the host then questions the stranger. It's really nice that the host doesn't make the stranger talk with their mouth full. After the meal and this questioning, getting to know you, there's some sense that the host and the guest bond and form this guest friendship relationship. And then the host provides blankets and beds for the night or the length of the stay. And when the guest is ready to leave, then the host gives gifts and provisions for the next part of their journey. So this is typically how these Greek and Roman hospitality scenes are written. Now, the Greeks were fascinated by the thought that any stranger they meet might actually be a god in disguise. And their literature is actually full of these hospitality episodes that they called theoxonies. And there are three elements to the typical theoxony, which you may recognize from the opening scenes of Beauty and the Beast or from the encounter between Telemachus and Athena in the Odyssey. The first is that hospitality is unwittingly bestowed or withheld by the host upon the divine guest who's always in disguise. The second element is that there's an epiphany or some sort of recognition scene where the divine identity of the god is suddenly revealed to the host. The host goes, "Oh my gosh, this is who you are. I can't believe I didn't even know." And then the third element is that there are attendant rewards or retribution for the host based on their treatment of the god in disguise. Obviously, rewards for if hospitality was bestowed, or retribution if they weren't good hosts or hostesses. Okay? These elements really demonstrate that hospitality may be extended as a sincere love of strangers, as just part of who you are and your character, or it could be withheld and hospitality corrupted, which also says something about who you are and your character. In the scene of Odysseus' encounter with Polyphemus, the Cyclops, for example, hospitality is horribly corrupted. It's just not good manners to eat your guests or to put out your host's eyes with a flaming firebrand. This corruption of hospitality really emphasized the barbarity, the baseness, the godlessness of the Cyclops and the island Odysseus found himself on. He had to get out of there fast, or risk losing all civilization himself. These scenes in the culture here indicate that hospitality is really tied to the gods, of being civilized and demonstrating the morality of the host's character, or the reverse of those things, the barbarity and baselessness, or the impiety or disrespect for God or the gods, and a lack of civility. So once I had a feel for the Mediterranean culture of hospitality around Clement's time, I wanted to go back further to see if there were substantial differences anciently that were impacting his writing, especially since so many first century Christians were coming from a Jewish background, and some of that Jewish identity was part of who they were. And so that led me to study hospitality scenes in the Hebrew Bible, also known as the Old Testament. Here, I found an abundance of hospitality scenes, but less consistency across the various scenes than exists in Greco-Roman or New Testament literature, for example. There is a theoxony scene in Genesis 17 when Abraham meets three men and he offers them a place to sit and rest and food. He offers them hospitality. And there are rewards that follow. These three men bless Abraham and Sarah because of their goodness with a son in their old age. And they have this kind of intense moment where Sarah laughs and the guests are like, "Why are you laughing?" And she's like, "I didn't laugh, right?" But this is the reward that they're going to receive because of their hospitality. But there's a critical piece missing from this theoxony scene as far as the Greek and Romans later are concerned. And that is the second principle of the recognition scene. And Aristotle is the one credited with pointing this out. He said that there's no moment of insight through token or detection. There's no reversal, no denouement, no sudden shock of, "Oh my gosh, that's who you are." There's none of that. So the surprise here is not in the identity of the guests, but in the nature of the reward. That Abraham and Sarah are going to be parents, even though they're old. And that's a different focus and emphasis. Well, the lack of these traditional Greco-Roman elements in these kinds of hospitality scenes that I found in the Old Testament really suggested to me that this was an antecedent to the later Greco-Roman tradition, and that some of these things were less formal and stylized than some things in Greece and Rome. So even though there's a plethora of hospitality scenes in the Hebrew Bible, it really just demonstrates that the ancient Israelites saw hospitality as part of their identity. In fact, there's one scholar, Douglas H. Knight, who said, quote, "Israel's host," meaning God, "gives his people the means to play host and return hospitality," end quote. And you get that sense that God, by hosting them in the promised land, is giving Israel an opportunity to return that favor to the strangers that they meet. Well, when ancient Israelite tradition collides with Greco-Roman elements and traditions and style, and Christianity emerges in the first century, what's the result? Well, that's what I wanted to find in First Clement. So in Clement's call to the Corinthians to return to proper behavior, to kind of the way they were before, he cites several examples from the Hebrew Bible of virtues and vices and the results of them. So I looked at the one specific towards hospitality. Now, remember Abraham entertaining the three men? Clement uses this one. And Clement's focus is not on the fact that Abraham was entertaining deity. That's not the emphasis. Unusual, given that the Greco-Roman fascination with the idea that surrounds Clement is more focused on this idea. Instead, Clement's emphasis is on the relationship between extending hospitality and its attendant rewards. He wants to make that connection, that link. And so the promise of the promise of the three men to Abraham and Sarah that they'll have a child was because of hospitality. That's the clinch that Clement wants to get through to the Corinthians. So similarly, when these three men go to Lot's nephew in to Abraham's nephew Lot in Sodom, Clement is representing the same thing. It's Lot's hospitality to these same three men that saves him and his family from the regional destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Similarly, he talks about Rahab in Jericho hosting the Israelite spies and says this hospitality is what saved her and her family from the destruction of Jericho. So Clement's focus is consistent with Greco-Roman influence in that he's emphasizing that hospitality is linked to earning favor with God and even salvation. And the failure to practice hospitality is seen as turning aside from God or impiety. But he really wants to make, with all of these episodes, the link that salvation is a result of extending this hospitality. Something else that interested me was that Clement didn't really follow the Homeric pattern of hospitality in these scenes. When he's elaborating about Rahab, for example, in Jericho, even though several of these Greco-Roman features and styles are available in the Hebrew Bible text. So, for example, Clement doesn't write of Israelite spies approaching Rahab's household or waiting for a response, which is actually there in Joshua chapter 2, verse 1. The host offers hospitality for that second piece there. And so Rahab puts them up and gives them a place to hide. And we talked about, or that protection is kind of the key feature of the hospitality that Rahab grants to them. Rahab doesn't question them after a meal or find out. She seems to already know who these spies are. So that part isn't included in the text or in Clement's writings or emphasis. But this next part, where during this meal and the correspondence between hosts and strangers, there's some sort of guest friendship relationship that's coming along. The covenant reciprocation, where Rahab says, "Look, I protected you. Now will you protect me and my household when Israel comes to destroy Jericho?" That part is there as part of this host-guest relationship. It's there in the text, but Clement doesn't talk about that very much. And then the last element here, that the host gives gifts or provisions, this is actually in the text, but Clement doesn't talk about it at all. Rahab provides the gift of information and instructions on how to avoid the patrols that are out looking for these spies. She says, go to the mountains, hide there for 3 days, and then you'll be able to go back without any issues. And so that's kind of mixed with the final scene with Rahab and these spies is mixed with this giving of gifts, and also the final element of the theoxony scene in which the host is granted a boon by the guest. And these guests, these spies, promise Rahab and her house that she'll be protected. So this really just, again, suggests that these Old Testament scenes predate the Greco-Roman traditions, and even Clement's use of them demonstrates he's more reliant on what he's trying to say than Greco-Roman tradition, or even on the point emphasized in the original text. And that's just a fascinating thing. Overall, this analysis has demonstrated several things about Christians in the first century, and Clement among them. One is that Clement is leaning on the established culture, on what's already there, what the people already know, but he's not dependent on it. He's able to put his own take on some of these things. Another is that Greco-Roman influence is there in some of these principles that he's using, as far as hospitality being part of our piety and good behavior, moral upstanding behavior. But he's not following the style of these hospitality narratives that are so common in Greco-Roman literature. It is definitely seen in 1 Clement that he views hospitality as a virtue that can help overcome divisions and the schism that the Corinthians face. And we also see these early Christians reframing their prevailing cultural norms and standards of behavior in terms of their new religion. So hospitality is something we do not for Zeus, but because we follow Jesus Christ. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope to send you on the next part of your journey with a gift that may come in handy. It's the gift of application. Today, you may benefit from the godly virtue of hospitality as you make room in your hearts, homes, and lives for the love of strangers or people who are not like you. Additionally, modern saints may benefit from applying a principle modeled by the early Christians and described by Elder William K. Jackson in the October 2020 General Conference. He said, quote, "We can indeed all cherish the best of our individual earthly cultures and still be full participants in the oldest culture of them all, the original, the ultimate, the eternal culture that comes from the gospel of Jesus Christ. We can demonstrate our love for God and Jesus as we extend hospitality or philoxenia, this love of strangers, to others. Jesus gave this as the new sign of his followers. In John chapter 13, verse 34, he says, 'A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another, as I have loved you, that ye also love one another.' It's part of the path of the believer to reconcile culture and religion in a way that strengthens character and commitment to God, as Clement encouraged the Corinthians to do. If we love strangers, even Cyclops, and extend hospitality or this philoxenia, we become closer to God, more civilized, and we may even find that hospitality is salvific. as God's hospitality towards us is salvific, as indicated in his invitation for all to come unto him and join him in the great feast at the end of all things. Thank you.